You're watching 2DRX4 on YouTube, and today we're going to get this Mercedes OM617 diesel bolted to a Jeep transmission. This is Project Special Reserve.
For people who are new to this series, you might want to go back and watch the last two videos, where I brutally removed the engines from both a Mercedes car and a Jeep pickup, and then did a quick comparison of adapters. So I'm going to start this off like the last video and talk about flywheel balancing. I know that's really not exciting, but this is a knife edge balancer or something like that. I got it off Amazon, and while it says nothing about flywheels, it should be able to perform a suitable balance. Let's just say I should have found something with a little more quality. The first problem I had with it was the cones here were way too small of a diameter and way too pointy to fit either flywheel. Warning, I am not a machinist. I don't even play one on YouTube. What you're about to see here is the closest approximation to being a machinist that I can muster. So for the cones, I chucked up some 2-inch hot rolled bar stock and began by starting the center in it. This is backwards. I probably should have faced it first. I warned you. From there I drilled it to the appropriate size to fit the shaft of the balancer snugly. I then checked the fit and figured it should be acceptable. And with that I began to carve this piece of artwork into a suitable point. Then I finally faced the end off to be reasonably square, and trued the outside diameter back. Of course, the horrible Taiwanese bandsaw was looking rather lonely, so it got to cut this piece off. And in this rather myopic clip, I then squared the cut face off. And it's like deja vu all over again, this time out of some 1.5-inch bar stock, and basically the same process, if maybe a little more refined this time since I was starting to get my head wrapped around this, having just made the same part in a slightly different scale. Finished, they look like this. Not the prettiest, but you know me. In an effort to make this balancer more accurate, I replaced the original bearings, which were crunchy and quite hard to turn, with some skateboard bearings which were a lot smoother and turned much easier. I also polished the through shaft on the lathe. You'll notice there's a bit of a worrying wobble to it. Well, that wasn't really as apparent at the time, and I really thought it was just the very ends that were out of true. I still wasn't getting consistent results at this point, so I figured if I decreased the distance between the supports, it would take some error out of the balancer. I simply drilled some new holes and moved the one support closer to the other one. I found that to get everything centered nicely, you needed to build this up in a fairly specific way, and exert a fair amount of pressure when tightening everything down, and the hole in the sawhorse was very helpful for making this possible, along with a piece of tubing that you could lean on. Then in a process that was comparable to watching paint dry, I was able to spin the flywheel and get it to stop at a consistent point. I was even able to determine that it was 10 grams out by adding weight opposite of the heavy point until it would not stop in a consistent place. Here's the problem though, it worked great on the MB flywheel, but once I switched over to the much heavier Jeep flywheel I just couldn't get consistent results. Eventually I concluded that either the shaft had too much run out, which it certainly did, or I was unable to get enough seating pressure on the cones to adequately center the heavier flywheel. At this point I was frustrated and had spent way more time and money than I had hoped to try and do this, and elected to take it to a shop for a dynamic match balance, as I was afraid I might just be wasting more time and money to try and make this work. However, I absolutely believe that this would have worked if I had started with a better balancer, or had purchased some precision ground bar stock to use as the through shaft and built cones that would fit it. The shop that I took it to confirmed my measurement of 10 grams out of balance, and it was within a few degrees of where I thought it was on the MB flywheel, and that was with the through shaft not being as true as it easily could be. So for that reason, I did not cut this entire disaster out of the video, as I think that it would be totally workable as a way to balance these, but you need to start with a better balancer and be prepared to do some tweaks to it. Okay, on to something else. When I removed the engine way back, I actually took off the AC pump, as I had no plans to use it at this time, along with the oil cooler lines, as I knew that they were just going to be in the way. Back in the present tense, I removed the MB oil pressure sending unit, both the motor mount arms, and the air filter slobber tube, as none of this would be reused. Many people use the factory motor mount arms with pancake style mounts for their conversions, but there's a lot of evidence that these aren't reliable with the torque they're subject to in low range, so I will be building my own mounts. The transmission I'm using is a TJ NV3550. This is not the transmission the kit is advertised for, but it fits basically the same as the AX-15. I wanted the NV3550 as it has a slightly better gear ratios, an external clutch slave, and is fully synchronized. This one is allegedly good used low mile, but I have no way to know for sure and left myself a nice little note so I wouldn't be surprised if it isn't. The first thing in Doomsday's instruction is to temporarily put the adapter plate on the bell housing and install the two upper bolts. You want to make sure the threads don't protrude through the plate on these, specifically on the upper left one. The upper right one is not as critical. They have clearance, but I filed the end slightly just in case. With that done, the adapter plate is then fit to the engine. It's a tight fit on the dowels, so it'll need to be tapped into place with a soft hammer. The point of this initial fit is to mark the oil pan so it can be clearanced for the starter. You're going to be removing a significant amount of material. I figured I'd do the initial big hack at this with a sawzall, as I didn't have any aluminum cutoff wheels on hand. As a little safety note, you should never use steel grinding or cutting wheels on aluminum, as they tend to plug up and then shatter. From there, I used a flap wheel to do the bulk of the rest of the material removal, although this was still a little tedious. I followed this up with a die grinder and a fine sanding roll-off, as you want this cut to be smoothed out and all the edges radius to reduce any chance of inducing a crack in the cast aluminum upper oil pan. This should be the sort of finish you're shooting for with this. With that, the adapter plate could be driven back on to check that enough material was removed. With the fit correct, the plate can now be secured with the provided countersunk cap screws. Note the one I'm installing now is longer and goes in this specific location. These are all installed with blue Loctite and torqued to 40 foot-pounds. Up next was putting the pilot bearing in the crank adapter. This is a fairly mild press fit, and I used a press to ensure it went in nicely, but I guess you could just hammer it in with a bearing driver easily enough. Make sure it seats flush with the back of the adapter, and remember the seal on the bearing faces to the transmission. Then the crank adapter and its 12 bolts could go on, again with blue Loctite. Be sure to transfer your match mark to the adapter so you can see it when you put the flywheel on. For torquing these, I wrapped a ratchet strap around the harmonic balancer and vacuum pump, as otherwise the crank will turn. There is fancier ways to do this, but a strap works just fine. The torque on these is 60 foot-pounds, and you should do it in a star pattern. Here I'm just going around the final time as a last check. Next, the cover piece for the crank adapter is slipped on. Do not force it, it will go on easily by hand when it is aligned correctly. Then the modified flywheel could be installed and the bolts torqued to 60 foot-pounds, again with blue Loctite. From there, it's really just a standard clutch install. Put the friction disc in place with the alignment tool, toss the pressure plate on, tighten the pressure plate down evenly, torque all the bolts to 40 foot-pounds, and remember to remove the alignment tool and lube the splines before trying to jam the transmission on. It doesn't work very well if you don't do that. Of course, not to forget is the new throwout bearing that goes on the transmission input. Make sure you lube things appropriately for this as well. And then the dowels can be installed on the adapter plate and the transmission is ready to be attached. As usual, the overhead hoist was invaluable for this. It really makes doing this sort of thing just a complete breeze. My only regret with it is not spending more money and building it as a proper 3D hoist right out the get-go. The attachment hardware could then be installed and torqued. The side bolts are 58 foot-pounds, the uppers are 32 foot-pounds, and the lowers are 60 foot-pounds. With all that done, finally a starter could be fit, and there is plenty of clearance around it. So in all of this, I have to say the adapter is very well made and goes together very easily. The only real concern I saw in all of this is this countersunk cap screw. If you needed to remove the upper oil pan, say to do a massive rework on it for steering and suspension clearance issues, that might be what we call foreshadowing, it is not possible to get the pan off without removing the transmission, clutch, and flywheel. Alternatively, I think the threads in the pan could have been drilled out and the adapter plate threaded instead, allowing a regular bolt to be installed in the other direction. Maybe this isn't feasible. Maybe you can't get the oil pan off without removing everything anyways, or maybe this will be an update seen in later kits.
So that's it for this episode of Project Special Reserve. I did not quite get as much done in this video as I would have hoped, but that's just how it goes sometimes. Hopefully you'll stick around and you'll watch the next one. There is more work done on this truck, and there's going to be far more work done on it in the future.